The doorbell rang on a Thursday morning. I opened it to find a young woman I'd never seen before. My name is Lily Cortez. I'm Brian's daughter. My knees almost gave out. Brian. That name hadn't been spoken in this house for 20 years. Not out loud anyway. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. Brian is dead, I said automatically. The words came out sharp, like they'd been sitting on the tip of my tongue all these years, waiting for someone foolish enough to ask. Lily nodded slowly. I know. He passed away last month. The air went still. Even the clock inside stopped meaning anything. She took a careful step closer, holding out the silver envelope. Before he died, he asked me to give you this. I didn't move. My brain was trying to understand how a ghost could send mail. The sunlight hit her wrist, and I noticed her hand trembling. What is that? I asked. She opened the envelope just enough to slide something out, a small brass key, old, and scratched the edges, worn smooth like it had been carried in a pocket for years. It caught the light and glinted softly between us. He said you'd know what it opens, she whispered. I stared at the key, then at her. The resemblance hit me like a wave, something in the tilt of her head, the way her eyebrows arched when she was nervous. She looked just like him, the same eyes that used to laugh before they learned how to hide. My name, Marian Lopez, 68-year-old, former small-time banker in Arizona, and this is my story. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to Ivy's Stories channel. We're creating a community of people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. I felt my chest tighten. Where did you come from, San Diego? She said quickly. I took the bus. It took a while to find your address. I leaned against the doorway, my heart pounding. Does anyone know you're here? She shook her head. No. I thought it was something I should do myself. I didn't invite her in right away. Instead, I looked past her to the street, half expecting someone to jump out from behind the mailbox yelling, "Surprise" or "Fraud," because nothing good ever arrives in an envelope. Your father, I said carefully, stole everything from us. My husband died because of that. Do you understand what you're standing in front of? Her voice wavered. I know what he did. Or, at least I thought I did. But before he died, he told me there's more. He said you deserve to know the truth. I laughed once, sharp and bitter. The truth? That's rich. Truth usually comes with interest, same as the lies. For a moment, neither of us spoke. A gust of wind lifted the corner of the welcome mat that hadn't welcomed anyone in 2 decades. Lily shifted, adjusting the strap of her backpack. He was sick, she said finally. Stage 4. The last thing he said to me was, "Don't let her hate me forever." Something inside me twitched, something I thought had turned to stone long ago. I crossed my arms, trying to smother the flicker of warmth that sentence brought. If he wanted forgiveness, he should have stayed alive to earn it. I don't think he wanted forgiveness, Lily replied softly. He wanted you to see what he left behind. Her words hung in the air. The girl took another step forward and gently placed the brass key into my hand. Her skin was warm against mine, real, undeniable. The key was lighter than I expected, but the weight of it felt enormous. I could smell the faint scent of metal and oil, like something that had been touched, too often worried between fingers, over years of guilt. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice quieter now. Because I need to know who my father really was, she said, and maybe you do too. I looked down at the key again. There were numbers faintly etched on its side, 31-2. Not a house key, not a car key. Storage, maybe. Behind us, the wind picked up, rattling the dry palm leaves along the fence. I realized I was still standing in my slippers. Finally, I stepped aside. Come in, I said. Lily crossed the threshold, her sneakers squeaking on the old linoleum floor. She looked around the small living room. Family photos turned face down on the shelves, a framed certificate from the bank I used to work at Dust, on everything except the calculator. You live here alone? She asked gently. Yes. Always. "Since the day your father left," I said. She nodded, setting her backpack down beside the couch. For a few seconds, the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator. "Do you want tea?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Sure, if it's not too much trouble." I turned on the kettle, my hands moving automatically through motions they remembered better than my mind did. In the reflection of the window, I could see her standing straight nervous, holding her own elbows like she needed to keep herself from breaking apart. She looked out of place in my world of quiet routines and unpaid bills, and yet somehow she didn't. When the kettle whistled, I poured 2 cups and handed one to her. She wrapped her fingers around it, grateful for the warmth. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said, "You said your father's dead." She nodded. "Then tell me," I said, my voice steady, "why does it feel like he just walked back into this house?" Lily looked at me, eyes glistening in the steam. "I don't know," she said softly. "Maybe because some doors don't close even when they're locked." I glanced at the key still lying on the table, the morning sun crawling over its dull brass surface. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I could almost hear Brian's voice again, faint like a ghost, whispering from the other side of time. "Mom, please understand." The words I never got to hear. I held the key up to the light. The edges were worn smooth like something meant to be used, not forgotten. The air felt heavier, the house smaller, the past suddenly too close to breathe. "Why now?" I whispered. The key didn't answer. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't sure I wanted silence anymore. I didn't sleep that night. The key lay on my kitchen table, catching the dim light from the lamp, as if it had something to say. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brian's face, not as a grown man, not even as the ghost I'd imagined him to be for 20 years, but as the boy who used to sneak sugar cubes from the pantry and swear he didn't. By sunrise, I stopped pretending to rest. I made coffee strong and bitter the way Oscar used to drink it and sat at the same table where everything had once begun to fall apart. 20 years, I whispered into the steam. 20 years since the night our lives emptied faster than our bank account. It started with the smallest things, a missing checkbook, a withdrawal slip I didn't remember signing. I thought it was a bank error. I worked in a bank. I trusted the numbers more than people. Numbers don't lie until they do. We'd spent 30 years saving me behind a counter, counting other people's dreams. Oscar in his workshop sanding furniture until his hands were a map of scars. We weren't rich, but we were steady. Every Saturday night he'd say, "We're getting there, Mary." And I'd nod, pretending I believed there was somewhere to get to. We had $186,000 saved. I could tell you the exact balance, $186.47 because I memorized it the way some people memorize prayers. And then one morning, it was gone. Just like that. The account balance read 0 I remember staring at the screen thinking it must be a system glitch. I refreshed the page twice, maybe 3 times, like if I looked fast enough, it would fix itself. But the zeros stayed. Oscar was in the kitchen making breakfast. I walked in holding the printout. "Something's wrong with the account," I said. He wiped his hands on a towel. How wrong I handed it to him. He went pale, the color draining from his face like someone had pulled a plug. All of it, I said. We called the bank. They said the transfer had been authorized from our joint account by Brian Lopez, our son. I can still hear the silence that followed. It was a heavy, wet kind of silence. Oscar sank into a chair, clutching the paper, and said just one word, "No." I wanted to say something that would fix it, that maybe it was fraud or identity theft or some misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Because I was the one who'd taught Brian how to manage money, and Oscar was the one who'd trusted him with everything. That night, I sat in the living room waiting for Brian to come home. The clock struck 11, then midnight. I called his cell phone, no answer. I called again and again. By 2:00 a.m., I was dialing hospitals, then friends, then numbers I hadn't used in years. No one had seen him. He was gone. When Oscar found out the next morning that Brian had packed his things, he didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just sat at the table and stared at the spot where Brian used to sit the plate, still there, the fork untouched. He said, "He took everything, Marian." I said, "We'll rebuild." He shook his head. "No, I don't mean the money." 6 days later, I was signing the death certificate. I still remember the way the nurse looked at me, soft pity practice sympathy. She asked if I wanted a moment alone. I said no. I couldn't look at him. Not because I didn't love him, but because love was too big a word for what I felt. It was guilt, anger, disbelief, and a hollow ache that didn't fit anywhere in my body. He died of a heart attack, they said. But I knew better. He died of trust, the kind of death no coroner writes down. After the funeral, people came with casseroles and condolences. They said time heals all wounds. I smiled politely and said, "Thank you," while thinking time doesn't heal anything. It just hides the body better. I sold Oscar's workshop, sold the house, moved into a small apartment 2 towns over, started working double shifts at the bank, not because I needed the money, but because I couldn't stand the quiet. People whispered. Some pitied me. Others blamed me. Maybe she shouldn't have trusted the boy with access, they said, as if motherhood were an accounting error. The police opened a case for financial fraud and disappearance, but even they stopped calling after a few months. Detective Raymond Chu, back then, younger, sharper, told me gently, "If he took it all, ma'am, he probably won't come back." He was right. Brian never did. There's one thing grief teaches you. Routine becomes your lifeline. You wake up, you breathe, you work, you eat, not because you want to, but because stopping feels like dying too. Years passed. My hair turned silver. People stopped asking how I was and started calling me Mrs. Lopez, who lost everything. And maybe they were right. Maybe that was who I was. Until this morning. Until a girl with my son's eyes stood on my porch, holding a key and a story I wasn't ready to hear. I looked at the silver envelope again. It was still on the counter where I'd left it after Lily went to sleep on my couch. She'd said she'd been traveling for hours and I didn't have the heart to send her away. The flap of the envelope was slightly open now, and something inside caught my eye, a line of handwriting small and neat, pressed into the paper like a whisper. I picked it up, my fingers trembling before I even read it. For my mother's truth. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Truth after everything, I ran my thumb over the words until the ink smudged slightly. Maybe that was all this key really unlocked. Not a box, not a room, but 20 years of silence. And maybe I wasn't ready to open that door. The house smelled faintly of chamomile and dust. I hadn't brewed tea for anyone in years, but it felt like the kind of thing you're supposed to do when the past walks into your living room wearing your son's eyes. Lily sat on the edge of the couch, her backpack resting by her feet, hands clasped so tight her knuckles whitened. She was polite in the way people are when they don't know the rules of the house they've just entered. I poured boiling water over 2 tea bags, watching the color bloom slowly. The steam fogged my glasses, and for a moment I saw Brian again, 12 years old, sitting at this same table, tracing patterns in the condensation on the window. When I turned back to Lily, I had to blink twice. Same eyes, same way of folding her hands, same quiet guilt that didn't quite belong to her. "You take sugar?" I asked. She shook her head. "Black is fine." Of course it was. Brian drank it that way too, pretending to be grown up before he even finished high school. I slid the cup across the table. So I said, sitting opposite her, "You'd better tell me why you're here before I start assuming the worst." Lily hesitated. Her fingers brushed the edge of the silver envelope on the table, the one that had arrived with her. "My father, he passed away 6 weeks ago, pancreatic cancer. It spread too fast." I said nothing. The kettle clicked off. Only the ticking wall clock moved between us, marking seconds that felt like judgment. "He left something for you," she continued, "and a note. He said, 'If my mother is still alive, give her this key. Tell her—'" I didn't run away. I laughed softly. Not the warm kind of laugh. Didn't run away. The words came out colder than I intended. "Sweetheart, he emptied our entire savings account and vanished. That's not running away, it's erasing yourself." Lily flinched. "I know what it looks like, Mrs. Lopez. I know what he did, but he swore to me he had no choice. I leaned back, crossing my arms. People always say that when they do unforgivable things. No choice. It's the first lie we tell to make the mirror easier to face. Her lips trembled, but she didn't look away. He was sick even back then. He said someone was threatening him. Threatening him, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Brian couldn't handle a parking ticket without calling me. Who on earth would threaten him? I don't know, she said quietly. He never said, but he kept this key with him for 20 years. Every night he'd touch it before he went to sleep, like it was proof of something. I looked at the key again, still resting on the counter. The metal caught the kitchen light, the edges worn smooth. Proof of what I asked. That he didn't mean to hurt you, she said. That he wasn't the monster you thought he was. Something in me twisted anger, grief, maybe both. Do you know what happens when you steal from your parents, Lily? You don't just take money. You take their years, their safety, their faith. He killed his father with what he did. You can't undo that with a note and a key. Lily's eyes glistened, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not here to defend him. I just need to know what really happened. I've spent my whole life listening to half-truths. Your dad made mistakes. Your grandmother hates him. It's complicated. I want to understand before I hate him too. Her words hit harder than I wanted to admit. There was something unbearably sincere in her voice, something I hadn't heard since the day Brian promised he'd never let me down. I picked up my cup. My hand trembled slightly, so I set it down. And what do you expect me to tell you, that your father was a good man who made a bad choice, that he was tricked, that there's some noble reason behind it all? No, she said, just the truth. The way she said it, it wasn't pleading. It was steady, firm, the same tone Brian used the day he convinced me to let him manage our accounts. For the first time since she'd arrived, I really looked at her. There was Brian's face. Yes, but softer. Kinder, maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that. Still a thought crept in, quiet and poisonous. How did she find me? How could I be sure this wasn't another game? Tell me something I said. Who told you where I live? She blinked. What you said, you came from San Diego. That's a long way to come knocking on a stranger's door. Someone had to give you this address. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the teacup. My father had a journal, she said finally. He wrote down things about you, your recipes, the way you folded laundry, how you hated lilies because they reminded you of funerals. The address was in the last entry. My breath caught. He remembered those things after all those years, but then reason clawed its way back. You could have found that online, or in some file. How do I know this isn't another trick? Her face hardened. Because I spent everything I had just to get here. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out a bus ticket, folded receipts, a wallet with barely $20 left. I'm not here for money, Mrs. Lopez. I'm here for answers. I studied her. There was no act in her exhaustion, no calculation in her posture. Just a girl who had traveled too far for something she might not even want to find. The kettle whistled softly, breaking the tension. I turned off the stove more to buy time than anything else. Let's say I believe you, I said. What now? You think that key will lead to some miracle that makes the past less awful. Lily looked down at the small piece of metal between us. I don't know, she whispered, but I think it leads to the truth, and I think you deserve to see it. The words hung there, heavy and dangerous. I wanted to laugh again to end the conversation, to send her back to wherever she came from, but something about her voice, the quiet certainty, the echo of a son I'd lost twice, made me pause. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness she was offering. Maybe it was closure. I glanced at the key, then at the envelope. The handwriting, for my mother's truth, still visible under the kitchen light. Truth. That damned word again. I took a deep breath. Do you even know what this key opens? She shook her head. No, but I think we can find out. The room fell silent. Outside, the wind picked up rustling through the dead leaves by the porch. It sounded like whispers from a life I'd tried to bury. For 20 years, I'd locked the door to everything that had Brian's name on it. Now his daughter was sitting in my kitchen with the key that could open it again. I didn't trust her, but I didn't trust my own curiosity either. Finally, I said, "All right, tomorrow morning. We'll go see what this key belongs to." Lily looked up, eyes wide with surprise. "You'll come with me?" I nodded slowly. If I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I refuse to face. She smiled for the first time, a small, tired smile that almost looked like his. And for a fleeting moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 decades. Not forgiveness, not hope, just the faint, dangerous pull of unfinished business. The morning came gray and dry, the kind of light that makes everything look a little older than it is. Lily stood by the car, nervously tying her hair into a messy bun, while I locked the door behind us. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "No," I said, fastening my seatbelt. "But I'm old enough to know that certainty is overrated." The drive out of town was quiet except for the hum of the tires on cracked asphalt. The highway signs blurred past Route 91, then Arcadia Exit 3B. Every mile felt like walking backward through time. Arcadia. The name had once been just a word on a map. Now it was the only thing left connecting me to a son who'd vanished with everything I owned. The storage facility sat on the edge of town, tucked between a used car lot and a half-abandoned diner. Rows of faded blue metal doors stretched as far as I could see, each numbered in peeling white paint. A sign at the gate read, "Arcadia Self-Storage. Safe, secure, affordable." I snorted. Safe and affordable. That's how every bad decision starts. Lily parked the car, glancing around. "You've been here before." "No," I said, eyeing the cracked pavement, "but I've been to enough places that claim to be secure to know it usually means no one's watching." She laughed softly, and for the first time since yesterday, it didn't sound forced. As we approached the entrance, a man in a navy jacket stepped out of a small guard booth, squinting against the light. For a moment, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. "Mrs. Lopez." The voice was familiar, gravelly touched with surprise. The man removed his cap, revealing a head of silver hair and a face worn by time but unmistakably kind. "Detective Raymond Chu," I said, almost smiling. "Well, I'll be damned," he chuckled. "Not a detective anymore, ma'am, just Ray these days. Retired 3 years ago. The pension's good, but the boredom's lethal." I took a closer look at his badge. It now said, "Security Officer." "So you downgraded from catching criminals to guarding their leftovers," I teased. He laughed. "Pretty much. Easier paperwork." Lily looked between us, curious. "You two know each other?" Ray nodded. "I investigated your father's disappearance 20 years ago." He paused, studying her face. "And now I'm seeing his eyes again. Life has a strange sense of humor." The air shifted. For a second, none of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "So what brings you back here, Mrs. Lopez?" "Not many people revisit the ghosts that took their money." I held up the key. "Apparently, I'm here to open one." He whistled softly. "You still have that thing? I remember your son had a locker here once, Unit 119. We searched it after he vanished. It was empty back then." Lily frowned. "Empty completely," Ray said. "No furniture, no boxes. Just a note taped to the wall that said, 'Don't come looking.'" We logged it and closed the file. I stared at the ground. Well, maybe he filled it again. Ray's eyes narrowed slightly. "If you're planning to open it, do me a favor. Don't go in there alone. I've seen too many bad reunions with the past." "Relax," I said dryly. "If something jumps out, I'll let Lily handle it." He smirked. "Then I'll call the ambulance ahead of time." There was something strangely comforting about the exchange, like slipping into a conversation you'd been having for decades. Ray accompanied us down the corridor, his heavy boots echoing on the concrete. The place smelled faintly of motor oil and stale air. Unit 119 was near the far corner, its door rusted at the edges, the lock still intact. I ran my fingers over the number plate, 119 Arcadia, the same engraving that was on the key. Lily handed me the key with both hands as if it were fragile. I slid it into the lock. It turned smoothly, too smoothly, like it had been oiled not long ago. Ray raised an eyebrow. That's new. The sound of the latch clicking open echoed down the corridor. I hesitated. My heart was pounding louder than it should for an old woman opening a metal door. Ray stepped closer. Want me to do it? No, I said. If this is another one of Brian's messes, I'm cleaning it myself. With a deep breath, I pulled the door up. It groaned like an old throat clearing itself. Dust drifted in the sunlight. Inside, there was barely anything, just a wooden crate, a small safe the size of a toaster, and a folded piece of plywood leaning against the back wall. That's it, Lily whispered. Ray shone his flashlight inside. Looks like your son wasn't much of a decorator. I stepped in carefully. The air smelled like metal and old varnish. The crate was nailed shut but light enough to move. The safe sat on top, covered with a thin layer of dust, as if someone had been here recently but didn't linger. Mrs. Lopez Ray said quietly, "Before you open anything, let me just remind you, people don't leave safes behind because they're filled with good news." I gave him a sideways look. "And yet here you are still waiting to see." He grinned. "You know me. Curiosity pays half my rent." I crouched down beside the crate. A small tag was stapled to its corner. The handwriting was unmistakable Brian's, the same looping letters he used on birthday cards when he was a kid. It read, "Don't forgive me yet." I froze. The words hit me like cold water. Lily read it aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't forgive me yet." What does that even mean? Ray leaned against the door frame, face tightening. Maybe it means there's more to forgive than you think. I swallowed hard. Or maybe it means he knew exactly what he did. Lily reached for the crate, but I caught her wrist. "Wait. What, if we're going to open this, I said we do it my way. Slowly, carefully." Ray gave a half smile, spoken like someone who's seen too many crime dramas. I shot him a look, spoken like someone who buried a husband because of this mess. The humor drained from his face. Fair point. We stood there in silence, the three of us framed by dust and decades of regret. Finally, I exhaled. "Let's get it over with." Ray nodded, stepping forward with his flashlight. Lily held her breath. My fingers trembled as I pried at the crate's lid. The nails groaned, the wood splintered. For a moment, I thought I heard something rattle inside metal on metal. Then a sharp click echoed from the safe beside it. All three of us froze. Ray's hand went to his belt. Old habits die hard. "Did you touch that?" I shook my head. The air felt charged electric, like the moment before lightning hits. Inside the half-open crate, something glinted under the flashlight beam, something that didn't belong in any storage unit. And then we saw it. A photograph. Framed, old, and cracked. It was Brian, standing with a man none of us recognized, smiling. Behind them, painted faintly on a warehouse wall, were the words, "Don't forgive me yet." The air inside the storage unit felt different now, thicker, heavier, almost alive. That single photograph had cracked open something I'd buried for 2 decades. But the real storm came when Lily pointed at the small metal safe sitting beside the wooden crate. "There's something inside," she whispered. Ray squatted next to it, ran his fingers along the edges. Combination lock, old model, 2000s maybe. The kind you open by instinct or desperation. He looked at me. "You still remember your son's birthday?" I nodded. "Every year." "July 15th. Ray stepped back. "Try it." I hesitated. My hands shook a little, whether from nerves or anger I couldn't tell. Turning the dial, I heard faint clicks. 07, 15, 78. The same sequence as before. The lock gave with a tired sigh. Inside the safe lay a small black USB drive, a stack of neatly banded bills, and a thick envelope crammed with folded papers. The smell of old metal and paper rose like memory itself. Ray let out a low whistle. "Well, that's more than lunch money." I stared. The bills were fresh, hundreds, fifties still crisp, though time had tinted their edges yellow. I counted the bundles silently. 220,000, I said, voice flat. Lily blinked. That's the exact amount you lost. I didn't answer. My pulse thudded in my ears. Beneath the money inside the envelope were dozens of receipts, wire transfers, cashier checks, envelopes stamped Confidential Assistance Fund. Each was made out to me, my name, my address, different banks, different years. The first dated 15 years ago, the last just 2 years back. I felt the room tilt. The receipts fluttered in my trembling hands. The anonymous payments that had kept me afloat through layoffs, hospital bills, and broken down cars. They were all from him. Brian. The receipts rattled in my hands, different banks, same signature. Each one carried my name, each one a ghost, returning rent money. Hospital bills, grocery cash. The truth pressed down like weight. My son hadn't vanished. He'd been wiring his silence into my life for 15 years. I sank to the concrete floor, the envelope still in my lap. Ray said nothing for once. Lily knelt beside me, her face pale. "He was helping you," she murmured. "All this time." My throat tightened, the sound stuck halfway between a cry and a laugh. The paper trembled, ink bleeding where my fingers clenched too hard. But facts don't care about emotions. They just sit there heavy and undeniable. I whispered, "Why? Why didn't he tell me Lily reached for the USB drive? Maybe he did." Ray frowned. "Careful. Might be encrypted or worse, corrupted. But she'd already plugged it into her laptop." The screen flickered and then there he was. Brian. Older, thinner gray in the temples, but unmistakably him. His eyes met the camera directly, calm, but tired, like a man already halfway out of the world. His voice filled the small unit. "If you're seeing this, Mom, it means I'm gone. I don't know how much Lily told you or what you've heard. I know what people said about me. Thief, coward, traitor. Maybe I was all those things. But I never took that money to run. I took it to save you." Air caught in my chest as the screen flickered. For a moment, even the fluorescent light seemed to hold its breath. The year I disappeared, Dad had a second mortgage. He didn't tell you. He borrowed money from someone he shouldn't have, someone named Victor. I was stupid enough to try to fix it by taking a delivery job. I thought I could pay it back. Instead, I got caught between people who don't forgive debt. The same people came after me after Dad died. I used the money in the safe to buy time your lives for mine. They promised if I stayed gone, you'd be safe. So I disappeared. The image trembled slightly as if recorded in a hospital room. He coughed, rubbed his forehead. I crossed the border, started over. Construction accounting, whatever I could get. I sent back what I earned piece by piece. You probably thought it was charity or luck. It wasn't. It was me trying to give back what I stole, every cent, and then some. My throat burned. The camera caught the faintest smile on his lips. If Lily found you, it means I finally ran out of time. The cancer won. But before I go, I need you to know none of it was about greed. It was about fear. I thought I could carry it all alone. He paused, eyes glistening. You once told me lies rot the soul faster than debt. You were right, Mom. Mine's been rotting for 20 years. I'm sorry. The video glitched, then resumed. If you still hate me, that's fine. I deserve it. But please, don't hate Lily. She didn't choose any of this. He looked down, took a slow breath. And if you want answers, if you want the whole truth, there's one more name you need to know. Victor. The video froze. Then the screen went black. No signature. No goodbye. Just silence. For a long time, no one moved. The hum of the fluorescent light was the only sound. I wiped my face and realized my cheeks were wet. I hadn't cried like that in years. Ugly, shaking, gut-level crying that didn't stop when the tears did. Lily reached out, but I raised a hand to stop her. My voice came out hoarse. Don't. Not yet. Ray broke the silence first. That's one hell of a confession. Whoever this Victor is, he's not some ghost. Loan sharks don't retire peacefully. I nodded slowly, staring at the screen that had gone black again. If he's real, I said, then my husband died because of him, and my son because of what he owed. Ray rubbed his chin. If Brian was paying you all these years, then someone else must have been watching too. People like that don't just vanish when the debt's paid. I looked at Lily. Her face was pale, jaw tight. You ever hear your dad mention a Victor? She hesitated. Once. I thought it was a friend. He'd get phone calls, step outside, come back shaking. I asked once who it was. He said, a man who owns too much of me. I closed my eyes. The words sank deep. 20 years of hatred, guilt, and half-truths rearranged themselves into something new, still painful but with purpose now. Brian hadn't been running from me. He'd been running for me. But that didn't erase the bodies his choices left behind. Oscar, himself, and the version of me that used to believe the world was fair. I whispered almost to the dust floating in the sunlight. Or maybe you're still lying, Brian. Maybe this is just another story you built to make dying easier. The words surprised me even as I said them. Ray exhaled. You don't believe him. I want to, I said softly. But wanting doesn't make it true. My eyes stayed on the frozen image of Brian's face on the screen. The pixels distorted his expression, flickering between guilt and hope. I didn't know which one to believe. The rain started halfway down the highway to San Isidro. Lily gripped the steering wheel, eyes focused on the wet road ahead, while I sat beside her, clutching the USB drive like it was a piece of bone. Ray had insisted on coming, but I'd told him no. If this man is still dangerous, I'd said he won't talk with a badge in the room. The name Victor rolled around in my head like a stone too heavy to swallow. According to Brian's video, Victor wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was the reason everything fell apart. And after 20 years, I was going to find him. We found the bar easily enough. It sat behind a row of shuttered shops on the old border road, El Puente Tavern. The sign read in faded red paint. Half the letters were missing. The other half leaned like they wanted to fall. Inside, the place smelled like old beer and despair. Ceiling fans creaked overhead, and a jukebox in the corner hummed with a song no one had chosen. At the counter sat a man slumped over a glass. Late 60s, maybe older. His hair was gray thin. His hands shook as he lifted the drink. The bartender leaned over and muttered, "You looking for someone?" Maybe I said, sliding a photograph across the bar. It was a still frame from Brian's video, the blurred silhouette behind him. Ever seen this man? The bartender glanced once and gave a dry chuckle. Lady, you just found him. He nodded toward the corner. Victor. I hadn't expected recognition to feel like nausea. My stomach turned as I walked toward him. Victor Alvarez, I asked. The man squinted up at me, eyes bloodshot and dull. Depends who's asking. Marian Lopez. The name hit him like a slap. He set his glass down slowly. Lopez, he murmured. So you're Brian's mother. He tried to smile, but it came out crooked. Sad. I was wondering when you'd show up. Lily stood behind me, tense but silent. I took the stool beside him. You knew my son. Knew him. Victor laughed softly, bitterly. I made him what he was. I didn't blink. Then start talking. He stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid. We worked together. Cross-border shipments, unregistered goods. Nothing fancy, cigarettes, liquor, sometimes cash. But then, one night, the job changed. He paused, throat working. The boss wanted us to move product that wasn't just alcohol anymore. Brian panicked, said he didn't sign up for that. Product, I repeated. You mean drugs? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I told him to take the money we'd earned and run. Victor continued, but he wouldn't leave without paying off his father's debt. Said he'd fix everything. I felt the air thin. Debt. To you, he gave a sad smile. Not to me. To the people above me. But I was supposed to watch him, and I didn't. Lily frowned. So what happened? Victor rubbed his face. His hands trembled slightly. He tried to outsmart them, took the cash, said he'd deliver it himself, told me he'd disappear afterward, but I told them. The words came out small, almost drowned by the music. "You betrayed him," I said quietly. "I thought they'd just scare him," Victor said. "They didn't. They came for all of you. Your restaurant, your home, everything." I saw the hit order go out. That's when Brian came back. He looked at me for the first time, really looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, but what sat behind them wasn't cruelty. It was exhaustion. He wasn't a saint, Mrs. Lopez Victor said. He stole. He lied. But when he realized they were going to kill you and Oscar, he went back, drove straight to the docks, led them away from your street. The rain outside pounded harder, syncing with my pulse. He fought like hell that night, Victor went on. I heard it on the scanner. 2 dead, 1 wounded. He got out, but barely. After that, he crossed to Tijuana and disappeared for good. I thought he'd died. Guess I was wrong. Lily's eyes glistened. He came back once, she said softly, to visit Dad's grave. He told me he'd done something unforgivable. Victor nodded. Yeah, he carried it like a curse. I stared at the old man, his shaking hands, his sagging shoulders. You watched him drown in guilt for 20 years, and you drank through it. He didn't deny it, because I helped push him under. The bartender walked by, dropped off another glass without being asked. Victor ignored it. For a long time, none of us spoke. The jukebox switched songs, something old, Sinatra maybe. Finally, Victor said quietly, "He wasn't lying to you, Marian. He didn't take the money to run. He took it to buy your lives. He paid for his mistake every single day." Something cracked inside me. I wanted to hate him, both of them, but all I could do was sit there staring at the condensation sliding down his glass. So I said, finally, voice breaking, my son was both a thief and a hero. Victor gave a dry laugh. Aren't we all? The rain outside softened to a drizzle. Lily was crying silently now, tears streaking down her cheeks. I reached for her hand, but my fingers froze halfway. I didn't know if I was comforting her or myself. Then I noticed something, a faint glimmer on Victor's wrist. A watch. Silver. Worn leather band. My breath caught. Where did you get that? He looked down. It's old. Been with me for years. No, I whispered. My chest tightened. That was my husband's. Oscar's watch. Victor's face went blank, then a faint flicker of shame. He dropped it the night of the heart attack. Brian gave it to me before he disappeared, said it was the only thing he couldn't bear to keep. The world went very still. Slowly, I reached across the bar and laid my hand over his wrist. The watch felt warm against my palm. When I looked at Victor, I saw the wreckage of 3 lives tangled in one decision. He didn't resist when I unbuckled the strap and slipped it off. You've had it long enough, I said quietly. He nodded. Maybe it's time it went home. I stood up. My knees ached, but my voice was steady. You owe me more than the truth, Victor. He looked at me defeated. I know, but that's all I've got left. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Marian, if you go digging into this, be careful. The people behind that debt, they don't forget, even after 20 years. I paused at the door, glancing back. Neither do mothers. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street shimmered in puddles that reflected the yellow bar light. Lily walked beside me, silent. I looked down at the watch in my hand, Oscar's watch ticking faintly again after all these years. Maybe it never really stopped. Mom, Lily asked quietly. Yes. What happens now? I slipped the watch onto my wrist, the metal cold against my skin. Now I said we finish what my son started. The night air smelled of rain and rusted metal. The storm had passed, but the world still seemed to hum with what it had left behind. I sat by the edge of Lake Morena, the same one Oscar used to fish at on Sundays, back when life was simple and laughter didn't cost so much. In my lap lay 2 things, Brian's letter folded and creased from being opened too many times, and the small silver key that had started all of this. The moonlight flickered over the surface of the water, breaking into small, trembling ripples every time the wind breathed. Lily sat a few feet away, hugging her knees. She'd begged me to come home, but I told her I needed one night alone with the ghosts. I struck a match. The flame wavered, small but certain, and I held it to the corner of the letter. It caught instantly. The paper curled, blackened, and then turned to glowing lace before collapsing into ash. Brian's words, his apology, his confessions, his truth, rose into the dark sky in a thin column of smoke. For a long time, I didn't move. I just watched the ashes drift down and vanish into the lake breeze. I whispered, "You wanted forgiveness, but you never asked for permission to die first." Lily shifted behind me but didn't speak. The key gleamed in my hand, cold and wet from the mist. That damned key, the one that had unlocked a story too big to close again. I looked at it for a long while. It was nothing but metal. No soul, no memory. Yet somehow it had chained me to 20 years of pain. I stood. My legs trembled a little from the cold. Mrs. Lopez Lily said softly, "Maybe you should keep it. It's all that's left of him." I shook my head. "No, Lily. What's left of him is already in us. The key is just a door that doesn't need to open anymore." Before she could answer, I threw it. The key arced through the night air, caught the moonlight for a brief second, then disappeared beneath the lake's surface with a faint splash. It was supposed to feel like release. It didn't. Instead, something inside me twisted sharp and wrong. For 20 years, I had lived with anger. Now that it was gone, I didn't know who I was without it. I stared at the ripples where the key had vanished. The water settled too quickly, too calm, like it had swallowed the last piece of me. And before I realized what I was doing, I stepped forward. The cold hit instantly. Lily screamed behind me as the water closed around my chest. Marian. The lake was darker than I expected, heavier. I plunged my hands beneath the surface, searching blindly. My fingers brushed something hard metal, small, but it slipped away again. The cold cut through my lungs. I heard splashes, Lily's voice cracking as she waded toward me. "Stop, you'll drown." But I didn't stop. I needed to find it. Because for some reason, losing that key felt like losing Brian all over again. My hand closed around it at last, smooth, slippery, but real. Then the world tilted. The next thing I knew, Lily was dragging me out of the water, gasping, half crying, half shouting. My knees hit the muddy shore, and I coughed lake water until my chest burned. Lily wrapped her arms around me, shivering. "You're insane. You could have died." I looked down at the key in my hand, still clenched tight. It glinted faintly like it was mocking me. "I couldn't let it go," I whispered. "Why? Because I'm not ready to forgive him. Not yet. But I'm not ready to forget either." The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air was still damp enough that our breath came out as smoke. Lily stared at me, waiting for something I didn't know how to give. Finally, I said the words that had been building all night. "I don't forgive you, Brian, but I don't hate you anymore either." It wasn't peace, but it was close enough to breathe again. The lake rippled in the moonlight as if it had heard me. I held the key out one last time. The water dripped off it like silver tears. Then I slipped it into my coat pocket instead of throwing it again. Maybe some doors are meant to stay half open. Lily sat beside me, resting her head against my shoulder. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft, like the sound of something healing very slowly. "I think he'd be proud of you," she said finally. I smiled faintly. "If he were alive, I'd kill him." She laughed through her tears. "That sounds about right." The sound of tires on gravel broke the quiet. Headlights cut across the lake's edge, growing brighter, until a familiar figure stepped out of the car. Raymond Chu. He waved once, then walked toward us, coat flapping in the cold wind. "You sure know how to make a man drive halfway across the county, Mrs. Lopez." I stood wringing water from my sleeves. "You tracked me." He shrugged. You called me from your phone an hour ago. You might have hung up, but it pinged your location. Good thing, too. His tone shifted lower now. I just came from the station. I frowned. Station Ray nodded. After you told me about Victor, I made a few calls, pulled some old case files out of storage. Turns out your son's name shows up in more places than you'd think. He paused, glancing at Lily, then back at me. Brian wasn't just running from the cartel, Ray said quietly. He was working with the authorities. He was their informant, the one who helped take the whole network down. The words didn't register right away. Informant. Whistleblower. My son. Ray continued. They sealed the records to protect him. The man you met today. Victor, he testified too. But Brian gave them everything. Names, routes, bank accounts. The FBI confirmed it tonight. I felt the world tilt again, but not from the water this time. All those years, I'd believed he was hiding in shame. But he'd been protecting us. He'd been protecting everyone. Lily's hand found mine. She was trembling. Ray's voice softened. He wasn't a saint, Mrs. Lopez, but he did one good thing before the end. Maybe that's enough. The wind blew across the lake, carrying the faint scent of smoke and wet soil. I looked down at the key in my palm, cold, heavy, real. It no longer felt like guilt. It felt like proof. Proof that Brian had finally unlocked something far bigger than the past. The morning light was gray, stretched thin across the horizon, like it was too tired to start another day. Marian sat in the small kitchen of her house. For the first time in months, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk yet. The clock on the wall ticked the way it always had, steady, indifferent. Across from her, Raymond spread a folder on the table. The papers inside were old, brittle at the edges, but the seal on top was unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. He looked at her with a careful calm. They confirmed everything. She didn't move, just listened. Ray continued his tone, professional but heavy. Brian Lopez was listed as a protected asset under the Witness Security Program, codename Blue Harbor. He provided full intelligence on the smuggling operation 20 years ago, the same one that funded the debt your husband took on. He turned a page. His testimony led to 12 convictions, including 2 ringleaders. The case file was sealed. He wasn't allowed to contact anyone, not even family. That's why the transfers came anonymously. The room went quiet. The truth landed like a stone dropped into deep water. No splash, just weight. Lily sat beside her, pale but composed. So he wasn't hiding, she said softly. He was protecting her. Ray nodded. He kept the operation from reaching back to you. That's why he stayed gone, until the cancer, until he ran out of time. Marian stared at the photo clipped to the file, Brian in his early 30s standing beside an agent, his expression worn but alive. He looked nothing like the boy who'd left or the ghost she'd built in her mind. She touched the corner of the image, tracing his face with her thumb. He was a son, she said, voice trembling, and I turned him into a story. Ray glanced at her but didn't interrupt. She continued, almost whispering. For 20 years, I told everyone he was a thief. I made him the villain so I could survive the shame. I told myself anger was power, but it was just a way to stop feeling. Her eyes glistened. Every night I locked the window and blamed the wind for the cold, easier than admitting I'd locked myself inside. No one spoke. Outside, a car passed the sound, fading down the street. The normalcy of it made the moment even stranger, as if the world should have stopped and didn't know how. Lily broke the silence first. Her voice was soft but steady. Grandma. She said he didn't want forgiveness. He wanted to be understood. Marian looked at her. Really looked. For the first time, she saw not just Brian's eyes, but her own reflection in them. And I wanted, she said quietly, to understand myself. The confession came out like an exhale that had been trapped for decades. Lily reached over and took her hand. Then, maybe this is where it starts. Ray began closing the folder. They'll release an official statement. If you want, the Bureau can provide a copy for your records. Marian shook her head. No, let it stay buried. He's already paid enough in silence. Ray nodded, respectful. Then he stood. You'll be hearing from them about property recovery. Some of what they seized was in Brian's name. He'd left notes on how he wanted it distributed. Distributed, Ray smiled faintly. Most of it's yours. Marian's lips parted, but no sound came out. After a moment, she whispered, I don't even know what to do with money from a man who never got to use it. Ray gave her a look, both kind and tired. Maybe the point isn't to spend it. Maybe it's to finish what he started. He placed a card on the table, nodded once at Lily, and left. The door shut quietly behind him. For a long time, Marian didn't move. The house was still except for the sound of the refrigerator and the distant hum of traffic. Finally, she stood and walked to the window. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance. Morning light touched the surface, making it look alive again. Lily came to stand beside her. What are you thinking? Marian smiled faintly. That I spent half my life trying to lock grief in a box. But boxes don't hold feelings. They just hold time. She turned from the window, her gaze distant but softer now. Brian carried his guilt like punishment. I carried mine like a shield. Neither of us knew. Forgiveness isn't something you give, it's something you grow into. Lily didn't answer. She just leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, and the two women stood there together, breathing in the quiet. The kettle began to whistle softly, and for the first time in years, Marian didn't rush to silence it. She let it sing. Later that afternoon, the house filled with golden light. Dust motes danced lazily in the sunbeams. Marian set the old photo of Oscar and Brian back on the mantel. For the first time, she didn't look away. Outside, the gate creaked open. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. Come in, she said without turning. The door opened and a familiar voice broke the silence. Marian. She turned. Frances, her neighbor for 3 decades, stood in the doorway, a practical woman with sharp eyes and a softer heart than she'd ever admit. Marian forced a small smile. Frances. You heard Frances nodded. Ray told me. About Brian. About what he did. Marian lowered her gaze. The truth changes things. It should, Frances said, but only if you let it. She walked to the table, looking over the burnt edges of the old letter that still sat in an ashtray. I used to think you were the strongest woman I knew. Frances said, her tone blunt but warm. Turns out, you were just the angriest. And that's not the same thing. Marian looked away, ashamed. Frances softened. Don't waste this, Marian. Don't let 20 years of pain end in silence again. If you really understand, now use it. Use the hurt for something good. Marian frowned. Like what? Frances shrugged. You'll know. The world doesn't need another angry widow. It needs a woman who's seen the fire and still chooses light. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and water your roses. They've been waiting for you. The door closed gently behind her. Marian stood there for a moment, the late sunlight painting the floor in gold. Her reflection in the window no longer looked like the woman who'd lived 20 years in resentment. She still looked tired, but alive. She whispered to the empty room. Maybe forgiveness isn't something you give. Maybe it's something you earn by surviving. Then she turned toward the garden. The roses were still there, wilted but not dead. She picked up the watering can and stepped outside. The building wasn't much to look at. A 1-story brick structure that used to be a dentist's office with a cracked sign and a parking lot big enough for 4 cars, 5, if you didn't mind parking crooked. But when Marian stepped through the door that morning, the space felt different, brighter, alive. The freshly painted sign over the entrance read, Oscar and Brian Lopez Foundation, supporting elder victims of financial exploitation. Lily had insisted on the tagline. It's what he would have wanted, she'd said. Now, months after the truth had come out, the place smelled of new paint, lemon cleaner, and possibility. Marian adjusted the small nameplate on her desk, Marian Lopez, founder and chairwoman. It looked ridiculous, and she knew it. She chuckled to herself. Chairwoman, she muttered. at 68. My knees can barely handle real chairs." From the doorway, Frances laughed. "Oh, hush. You're the only CEO I know who still waters her plants before staff meetings." Marian smiled. "They're the only ones who listen." Frances walked in with 2 mugs of tea and a mischievous grin. "I still can't believe this is happening. You running a foundation. Last year you were threatening to burn your mailbox because the water bill was late. That was a justifiable act of protest, Marian deadpan taking the tea." Frances smirked. "Sure it was. But look at you now, a woman on a mission." Marian sat back the steam from her cup, fogging her glasses. "I'm not on a mission. I'm just making sure no one else ends up where I did." Frances raised an eyebrow. "You mean broke and bitter?" Marian grinned, unoffended. "Both. Preferably neither." They laughed, and for the first time it sounded easy. On the far wall, framed photos lined a simple shelf. Oscar in his uniform, Brian as a teenager holding a fishing rod, and Lily at her college graduation. Between them sat a bronze plaque engraved with Marian's new favorite phrase, "If money can destroy it, can also rebuild." Those words had come to her the day she signed the foundation papers. When the lawyer asked what she wanted to do with the restitution funds, she'd said without hesitation, "Use them. To help the ones no one believes." Because she knew what it felt like to be old and invisible, to have your own children talk about you like a burden, your signature treated like a resource instead of a boundary. She wasn't going to let anyone else feel that way again. Lily came in carrying a box of brochures and a stack of envelopes. She'd been running the admin side since day one, efficient, sharp, and far too patient for her age. "Grandma," she said, setting the box down, "we just hit our first 100 applications. Mostly seniors trying to recover stolen pensions or fraudulent loans." Marian whistled softly. 100 already. "Word spreads fast when you don't charge people for justice," Lily said, smiling. Frances nodded approvingly. "You know, I think Oscar would have liked this. Even Brian." Marian's eyes softened. Especially Brian. She turned toward the framed photos again. "Funny," she said. "He spent his life running from what he did with money, and I'm spending mine trying to make peace with what it can do." Lily smiled. "You always say forgiveness is a form of accounting." Marian tilted her head. "Because it is. You can't balance a heart until you face every debt." She set down her pen and looked around the small office. Sunlight catching the edges of the paperwork, the photos, the steaming tea. This place, she said, isn't about redemption. It's about reclamation. If money can wound, it can also heal. If lies can break families, truth can rebuild them. Frances lifted her mug. Cheers to that. They clinked cups. By noon, the office buzzed with quiet movement. Volunteers on old computers' phones ringing with soft-spoken seniors, explaining their cases. Marian walked among them, listening, offering small nods, little smiles. It wasn't glamorous, but it was good work. She paused near the window. The sun hit the photo of Brian again, lighting up his eyes in a way she'd never noticed before. For a moment, it almost looked like he was smiling at her. "You're still watching, aren't you?" she whispered. Later that afternoon, when the last volunteer left and the office lights dimmed, Marian sat alone at her desk. The silence felt peaceful this time, not heavy. Frances reappeared with a file folder. "Before I go, your accountant needs one last signature." Marian opened the folder, scanned the paperwork, and signed with her usual dry wit. "There. Proof of life." Frances smirked. "You really should have that engraved on your tombstone." Marian chuckled. "If I outlive the marble, maybe I will." She handed the folder back. "Go home, Frances. It's late. Fine. But don't you dare start another project while I'm gone." "No promises," Marian said. Frances winked. "Of course not." The door closed behind her, leaving Marian alone once again. Lily entered a few minutes later, holding something small and weathered in her hands. Grandma Marian looked up from her desk. Lily hesitated. "I found this while organizing the archive boxes. It was tucked behind one of the legal files." She stepped forward and placed it gently on the table. A faded brown envelope. The edges frayed, the ink barely visible, but the handwriting unmistakable. To Mom. Marian froze. She reached out, tracing the letters like she was afraid they might vanish under her touch. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "In the folder marked Private Foundation Funds. I think Brian meant for you to see it after everything was settled." Lily looked uncertain. "I didn't open it. It felt personal." Marian's throat tightened. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Lily." Lily smiled faintly. "Do you want me to stay?" Marian considered. "No. This part, I think I need to do alone." Lily leaned over, kissed her grandmother's cheek, and whispered, "He'd be proud of you." Then she left the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. Marian sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid one nail under the flap. The paper resisted, then gave way with a soft tear. Inside was a single page. She unfolded it slowly. The first line read, "If you're reading this, Mom, then I finally did something right." Her breath caught. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them because somehow, even after death, Brian still had his timing. The lights flickered once and came back on steady this time, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Marian sat motionless at her desk, the letter half unfolded in her trembling hands. Outside, the late afternoon had slipped into the gentle gold of evening. The sound of the wind brushing against the window made the paper tremble slightly like it was breathing. She took a long breath and began to read. "Mom, if I could live again, I'd still take the money. Because if I hadn't, you wouldn't be here to read this." The words stopped her heart for a moment. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even an apology. It was just truth, raw and heavy, stripped of every defense. She kept reading. "I've spent years trying to make peace with what I did. But peace isn't something you find, it's something you give. If you're holding this letter, it means I ran out of time. But I hope you didn't. Forgiveness isn't for me, Mom. It's for you. Because the moment you forgive me, you'll finally sleep again." Marian's throat closed. She pressed the letter to her chest, tears sliding silently down her face. Outside, the sound of laughter floated from the garden. Lily's voice, Francis's familiar, playful scolding. The two of them were somewhere among the roses, arguing with the radio that played old jazz like it was 1975 again. Marian smiled through the tears. It was strange how sound could bring life back into a house that once felt like a mausoleum. She wiped her eyes and looked again at the letter. Brian's handwriting slanted, confident, yet uncertain. The ink faded in places, but steady. "Mom, tell Dad I kept his watch running." That line made her laugh softly, a fragile, aching laugh that turned into a sob halfway through. She reached for the photo frame on the shelf, Oscar and Brian standing side by side, both squinting into the sunlight, fishing poles in hand. She slipped the letter behind the picture and closed the frame carefully. Now father and son were together again, and so were their words. The garden smelled of soil and chamomile. Francis sat on a bench humming along to an old tune from the radio, while Lily kneeled among the rose bushes, her hands dirty from replanting new shoots. Marian stepped outside quietly, the letter still warm in her pocket. Lily looked up and smiled. "Hey, Grandma, I think they're finally growing." "They always were," Marian said softly, kneeling beside her. "We just needed to stop pulling the weeds before we knew what was left." Francis laughed. "Is that gardening advice or philosophy?" Both Marian said, smiling. Francis sipped her tea and squinted at her friend. "You look lighter. Did something happen?" Marian hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "He left me a letter." Francis's voice softened. And he was right," Marian said simply. "Forgiveness isn't about letting go of him. It's about letting go of the version of me that couldn't forgive." Francis exhaled long and quiet. "Then I suppose we can call that progress." Lily grinned. "Or enlightenment." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Francis teased. "We're old, not saints." They all laughed, then real laughter, unguarded and human. the kind that makes you forget what sorrow ever felt like, even for a few seconds. Later, as the sun lowered behind the hills, Marian stayed in the garden alone. She sat on the old wooden chair Oscar had built, the smell of roses thick in the air. The sunset poured golden light across everything, the grass, the petals, the quiet face of the woman who had finally made peace with the ghosts of her own story. A soft breeze lifted her hair. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day, and whispered, "You can rest now, Brian. So can I." For a while, she just sat there breathing, listening. The air was filled with ordinary sounds, the creak of wood, the rustle of leaves, Frances laughing from the porch, Lily singing along with the radio. No violins, no thunder, just life. She stood slowly and walked back inside. The house felt warm again. On the shelf, the photo frame caught a sliver of sunset, the light bending through the glass, illuminating Brian's letter just enough that one final line appeared clear between the folds. "We never really lose everything, Mom. Sometimes it just takes losing everything to see what we still have." Marian smiled quietly, gently, like a woman who had finally stopped fighting time. She turned off the lamp and the room fell into soft shadow. But through the window, the light from the garden still reached in, touching the photo frame, the letter, the table, her hands. She closed the ledger she'd kept for years, the same one where she'd once recorded every expense, every loss, every number that used to define her worth. This time, she didn't write anything new. She simply shut it. The cover clicked softly, final but peaceful. It turns out we never really lose everything. Sometimes it just takes losing everything to see what we still have. This story isn't really about loss. It's about what remains when anger finally runs out and love quietly returns. Marian didn't rebuild her life overnight, but somewhere between grief and forgiveness, she found a reason to live again. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for. If this story touched you, leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories, your cities, your late-night thoughts, and if you believe it's never too late to make peace with your past, tap subscribe and stay with us for more true-to-life stories about family healing and quiet justice, because sometimes the softest voices carry the deepest truths.